Okay, I may as well show you what I'm doing here. I'm looking at this old photo from Imagekind. And here you see I even slipped up and said old photo. This is supposed to be an artwork depicting what's going on here. And I've shared such things in the past, maybe many years ago. In a past video we were looking at King Solomon's temple and how advanced it was for architecture and technology in biblical days. And today this is something very similar. I could spend too much time investigating this supposed artwork, but that's not my point today. In past videos I've proposed that this may have been a type of photograph, the ability to capture an image and every detail of it, exactly like a camera. And like I said, I could spend forever looking at not just this one image, but the thousands that exist depicting what was going on in these times of old. Just remarkable. But what I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm going to do that today, is prove my point that this may have been some type of photograph. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a picture like this one, and we're going to import it into this art program that will now take a real photograph and turn it into an art rendering. And let me show you the picture that I've used for this example. It's this one here. And here we go. Here we now see this picture transformed into this. And whether it was done with some computer program like I'm using today, or if it was just rendered by hand, perhaps to hide the fact that they had cameras way back in these ye olde times of Solomon, and they had beautiful architecture and buildings, and much of it in ruins by the time we're seeing this depiction. And here once again we'll try an example. We'll take this photograph, which is an actual photo, and here we go. A perfect way to preserve history for a select few while telling the masses it may have never existed, that it was only a proposed rendering. And such is the case with all these depictions and volumes that are telling us a story that most people have no idea about, and if they did see these images, would think them to be some sort of folly of the mind. And once we can conceive that these renderings may actually be real depictions, we can begin to look at all renderings with fresh eyes. Here, for example, a supposed rendering of the Washington Monument, showing it surrounded by a ring of columns and the same type of ornamentation we might see on triumphal arches, and even showing the discoloration in the stone that exists in actuality. Why would you anticipate this discoloration in a rendering? And just as we saw in the old biblical pictures, same thing here. Absolute glory in the background, and these blocks down here are the size of the ones used in Baalbek. So just a quick segment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. In today's video, we'll discuss ancient figures of the past, the modern construction of castles, and finally we'll end with the reset and the black man in the old world, and an overall possible theory. Welcome. And sometimes we work on something, in this case a 24-minute recording, and you realize that your microphone was not plugged in. It was plugged in, but it was not selected. menacing technology? And is it the technology? Or is it some kind of menacing spirit? Sometimes it feels like the latter. But here, sadly, I have lost this recording, and I'm gonna try to rehash it. I still have the visual part, it's the audio that didn't come in. So I'm gonna hit play and just see what comes to mind. Maybe I don't get the full 24 minutes out of it, but who cares? It's like dropping some food in the dirt when you're really hungry. You might decide to eat the parts that have been untouched. Here, this comment was from Thomas Helberg. He says, have you seen this high-tech ancient queen found in Spain? He called her the Queen of Ancient Tartaria. And I was very excited, and I jumped on the Google, and this is what we get. The Lady of Elche, a beautiful statue, and clearly person of the past. I talked about, of course, how high-tech she is, and clearly how this woman comes from an advanced people. And this, again, was unearthed in Spain, and it really brought me back to the Native Americans, especially of the Southwest. The Hopi, the Navajo, will wear their hair in this kind of spun, braided fashion. Also reminding me of Princess Leia in Star Wars. Of course, the Native Americans did this before Star Wars, and I believe before the Native Americans did this, it was an old tradition, as we can see here. This also reminded me of the Olmec civilization in Mexico, and we see giant statues all wearing helmets, clearly helmets. We also see this depicted with Quetzalcoatl, and it seems like he's in a vehicle, and he also has some kind of helmet with some microphone apparatus, and I had never seen this image before. The first time I saw it was on the New Earth channel, and this is clearly something they don't want us to see. Sometimes a picture can invoke memories, and I believe this is one of them. And in the sacred texts we find in India, for example, we're told of great battles in the sky, using vehicles that they call Vimana, and upon first hearing these tales, just seeming like some kind of sci-fi. But now when we can begin to see the key characters that may have been at play back in this age, such as this lady, again the Olmec, and all the advanced architecture that is clearly tech to our understanding. Only then can we begin to appreciate that a people of the past may have been flying around, having battles, and no different than today. Very similar people, all throughout this realm, engaged in battles, often without the consent of the people. These are decisions made by a small, corrupt faction that should be removed from office as soon as possible. But the next comment I received was a share in India, and this is called the Golden Temple, and absolutely mind-blowing. Not just the Golden Temple, but the building behind it as well. And this is the kind of structure that I think such a lady would be worthy of. Not a grass hut or a structure built of wood. And I thank you for this share. So here we have the people of the old world, and I'm not sure if this is Sumerian writing, but some of the oldest. And here we have this advanced depiction in what seems to be gold, golden temples, and I would challenge the people who claim it would be possible to do things like this with horsepower in a few years to even build me the smallest scale model of this. Such comments are absolutely insulting to our intelligence. Forget about the buildings, just the waterworks and the waterproof cement and canals alone, I believe, would be impossible in such an early time period if we're to follow our narrative. And next, somebody shared this beautiful castle in the Napa Valley. We're told this is a vineyard and winery that was open to the public in 2007. We're told construction began as recently as 1995. The property suffered a fire. It was called the Glass Fire. I'll show you a picture of that. But the castle was left unharmed. Of course it was. Fire does not burn castles. But this was not an ordinary fire. Here we can see in the corner what kind of fire it was. A fire that burns cars and not the vegetation around it. In a very beautiful castle. I have no doubt that we can build castles. If we throw enough money and resources at the project, I believe we could build anything we see in the realm. But my point is we don't. And more importantly, I question the ability to build such things 150 years ago, even 1,000+ years ago, as we are told. And this is open to the public. It would be interesting at least to see and compare these construction photos, if there are any, to past castles, just to give us an idea of what it would take in this day and age to construct such a wonder. And really having a Star Fort feel. But I did see a few pictures after the fire, and the walls were not as thick. Here again, this glass fire. We know exactly what kind of fire this is. Perhaps somebody wanted to get some insurance money to finish their project. And even here we do see that the energy weapon may have been directed at this wall. Very interesting. Let me know your thoughts. And when I was young, my parents had a restaurant in a castle shopping center called the Borgata. Upon immigrating to the U.S., my parents went into the restaurant business, serving French and Italian food. And I spent a portion of my youth in this shopping center, running around as a child does. And it was a beautiful shopping center, piping classical Baroque music throughout the outdoor mall. And for a child, it was easy to imagine that I was living in a pastime. And this was our restaurant, right here on the corner. I think you can see an umbrella here on the patio. And within the last 5 or 10 years, they tore this whole shopping center down. Now there's apartments here. And of course it's a replica, but I always thought it was one of the nicer modern projects that I'd seen in my town. And perhaps we could build a little city like this. This next part will be a bonus, but I'm not going to roll the credits yet. I also want to apologize. The audio is poor. Now this is a comment in response to a comment by Lex Will. Lex Will has been a friend of the channel for a long time, and today he was upset that I failed to mention the black man's history in all of this research that we do. Now, I have not failed to talk about the black man, some videos exclusively, and all throughout talking about what I believe is the false narrative of slavery and the idea of bringing Africans to the American continent in the name of it is completely ridiculous. And I have said many times that I believe the black man existed everywhere. And we see that in Mexico with the Olmec civilization, as I've touched on before. We see many North American, Native American tribes that clearly seem to be a black people. And Lex should know this about me. And I don't discriminate against any races, and I think we've all been taken for a ride. We all have a place in this past history, as we do in the present predicament we find ourselves in. And I think with many in this community, trails leading back to the Moorish Empire and the Moors, which may have ties to Lemuria, and the term even being used today writing new narratives for new people, as we see with the more men. And to me, there is clear evidence that all races were present in the past in an advanced fashion. The idea that all man was primitive, rising from the mud into the cave, is an idea of our false narrative that's been part of our indoctrination. We see depictions of the black man in Europe on coins, dressed as kings and queens. And I think why Lex may have gotten upset is the showing of all of these pictures of these inheritors that are often of a fair complexion. And yet these are the photos that we are presented with. There is very little remaining from the past reset, and what is remaining is kept under lock and key. In that last video that I think he was upset with, I was focusing on the Caucasus Mountains of Russia, not the big picture, as I am right now. But even now I'm not focusing on the big picture, I'm focusing on the black man. So when we see these inheritors in all newly formed nations filing in with fresh clothes, seeming to have no past, perhaps the grown orphans that know only what they've been told. In these cases, we don't see grand introductions of black people. I have not yet seen such a photo, even of the slaves. This would have been pretty important to capture, either in a rendering or some sort of depiction, a lithograph. I mean, not one. And we don't see them being introduced in the friendly fashion with the clean clothes and freshly shaven faces that we see, such as depicted in my past video. But yet we see them existing in every corner of this realm. The Dogon people carrying wisdom, which is beyond the knowledge that we even share commonly today. The Aborigines of Australia, or more appropriately, the Origines, or originals, again carrying knowledge that is beyond our current understanding, shared as a people. And these people clearly survivors of the reset, living in a simple way, so easily denounced by the mainstream historians as a primitive people, yet absolutely wise in their culture and knowledge, and this could not have just sprouted into existence in 200 years. This is a much older wisdom that these people carry. And again, I've said this past civilization was a one world people, different ethnicities behaving as one. And after the reset, any survivors just look primitive, but yet they survived. These are the most advanced people post-reset, and therefore the greatest enemy to the controllers, who would seek to rewrite our narrative and discard all the wisdom and knowledge of old. And then what? What do I think happened? After the reset, all races remaining are rendered primitive, retaining as much of their culture as they can into their arts and customs and traditions, and also scavenging what they could that remained from the old civilizations, the tech, the records, in some cases the remains of the cities. But yet, this would not be enough. One would need a little help, a little jump start. And in our false narrative, we are told that the primitive man and cave dweller 10,000 plus years ago suddenly went from a hunter and gatherer to a farming people. And even in the so-called narrative, this transition is somewhat of a mystery, seeming to happen realm-wide at once. People suddenly pulling their heads out of their asses. And I don't think this happened tens of thousands of years ago, but I think this happened only 200 or 300 years ago. And why do I say that? Is of course because of all the research we do, but also it seems there was some assistance to the jump-starting of our post-reset civilization. Yes, survivors of the reset all throughout, but some assistance is necessary for this sudden, sharp, upward curve of advancement. Somebody is giving us seeds and pushing us forward. And one option is that this assistance came from the giants found in the north, dwelling somewhat within the lands that are forbidden to us, as we read in the account of Olaf Jensen in the lands beyond the poles. And I do personally feel that's a first-hand account. And I think these giant, friendly, advanced beings helped kickstart man's progress, and suddenly we see a sharp rise in population and advancement, which otherwise I think would not be possible. And furthermore, I think whoever was the fortunate people to have the most assistance also turned on these beings. And we have accounts of this all throughout our narrative, even in Native American lore, that it was the people that took out the giants. But what I think is false is that these giants were primitive and savage and barbaric. And I think every account we've seen of giants, even in present times, going back to some of the oldest photographs, they seem like a very good-natured people. And I believe that the story is a half-truth, that we did take out the giants. After they helped us, we turned against them, and they still exist. They have simply retreated to whence they came from. And they know that most of us are good, and that a small faction has turned on them and infiltrated all of us. And overall, this gives me hope, for if it was all up to us as a misled people, I'm not sure if we would stand a chance. So that's it. I do hope you enjoyed, and do have a blessed day. Please like, comment, and subscribe.